The mountain road twisted like a living serpent beneath the pale, washed-out sky. Rain had passed an hour ago, leaving the asphalt slick and shining with reflected light. The pickup truck that carried Mesa rattled with every turn, its old suspension squealing in protest. She sat in the passenger seat, her camera case clutched tightly between her knees. Out the window, the hills of northern Thailand rolled in layers of green and mist, rising into ridges that seemed to touch the clouds. Villages appeared briefly in the distance, then vanished again behind trees. Uncle Seng, the driver, was an aging man in a faded army jacket, his skin the color of old teak wood. He smoked without speaking, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping the rim of the dashboard in rhythm with the faint country song playing through a weak radio signal. Mesa broke the silence. "Is the road always this quiet?" Sang grunted. "Quiet's good, means the mountain's sleeping." She smiled politely, not sure whether he was joking. "And when it's awake?" He glanced sideways, smoke curling from his nostrils. "When it's awake, you'll know." The pickup turned onto a narrower path of red clay that wound into the hills. The forest closed in, tall teak and banyan trees with vines hanging like curtains. The air smelled of wet soil and rotting leaves. Mesa rolled the window down and breathed in deeply. "It's beautiful out here," she said, almost to herself. Sang gave a short laugh. "You city people always say that. You see the green, not what's hiding under it." Mesa leaned forward, intrigued. "What is hiding under it, Uncle?" He spat out the window. "Bones, old ones, and things that don't forget faces." They drove another 30 minutes before a wooden sign appeared, leaning to one side. The paint was faded, but Mesa could still make out the Thai letters, Huai, Phakhong. Huai, Phakhong. The truck rolled into a valley cupped by forested hills. The air felt denser here, as though sound itself moved slower. A few chickens darted across the dirt road as they entered the village, a cluster of wooden houses on stilts, smoke rising from their kitchens. Children stopped playing and watched the truck pass. Old men sitting under the shade of a tamarind tree fell silent. A stray dog barked once, then retreated into an alley. Mesa raised her camera instinctively, but stopped when she saw their expressions. Not curiosity, but caution. They halted before a weathered 2-story house near the edge of the village. Its porch sagged slightly, but flowers bloomed in old pots by the steps. An elderly woman stood waiting, Aunt Orn, wrapped in a hand-woven shawl, her silver hair tied back neatly. "You must be Kun Mesa," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Long road, wasn't it?" Mesa bowed slightly. "Yes, Auntie. Thank you for letting me stay." "Come in before the mist gets thicker," Aunt Orn said, gesturing toward the house. "It comes early here." Sang unloaded Mesa's bags and placed them on the porch. Before leaving, he leaned closer to her and murmured, "Remember what I told you on the road. If you hear drums, stay inside." Then he drove away, the sound of his engine fading into the trees. The house smelled faintly of incense and wood smoke. Aunt Orn led Mesa to a small room upstairs with a woven mat on the floor and a mosquito net hanging loosely above it. A small wooden window opened toward the forest. "I don't have much to offer, dear, but this room has good air and no spirits trouble it." Mesa chuckled. "That's all I need." "Don't laugh," the woman said softly. "The forest listens when people laugh at it." Mesa's smile faltered. That evening, they ate together on the porch. The mountains beyond were shrouded in fog. Crickets sang so loudly it felt like the sound was vibrating through the wood. Mesa took out her notebook. Aunt Orne, can I ask you something? I heard there's a ritual people used to perform here, something called the moonbound rite. The spoon in Aunt Orne's hand paused midair. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then, without looking at Mesa, she replied, "Used to. So it's not done anymore?" The old woman finally met her eyes. Some things are done even when people say they aren't, but they're not for outsiders. Mesa hesitated, sensing the edge in her voice. "I'm not here to offend anyone," she said gently. "I just want to document the tradition, to understand why people believed in it." Aunt Orne sighed. "Belief is not the same as memory, child. Some things are remembered because we fear them." She stood, gathering the dishes. "Get some sleep. The nights are long here." Mesa stayed up, reviewing her notes by lamplight. Most of her research came from scattered references online, mentions of an ancient northern ritual where villagers would bind the spirit of the dead to the moonlight. It was said to prevent the restless dead from walking again. But details were scarce. No photographs, no dates. Almost as if the ritual had erased its own traces. At around midnight, Mesa heard something faint outside, a hollow thud. Thud, echoing from somewhere in the valley. She froze, listening. It came in slow intervals, like the beat of a drum. Then silence. She waited a full minute before exhaling. "Probably someone drying rice," she muttered, though her own voice sounded uncertain. She closed the window, drew the curtains, and lay down under the mosquito net. Outside, the mist thickened until the forest disappeared completely. In the far distance, a dog began to howl, a long, trembling note that seemed to answer the rhythm she had heard. From the far end of the village, deep in the fog, came a sound like a voice. Soft, melodic, almost human. "Bind to the light. Tie to the shadow." Mesa turned in her sleep, unaware that the faint beam of moonlight slipping through the shutters had shifted and now fell directly across her face, pale and cold. Morning arrived without warning. No sunrise, only the gray diffusion of mist that made it impossible to tell where the sky ended and the valley began. When Mesa stepped outside, her breath fogged in the air. The village smelled of damp wood and smoke from breakfast fires. Children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere down the slope, though she couldn't see them through the haze. Aunt Orne was already awake, sweeping the porch with a handmade broom. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though each stroke followed an invisible rhythm. Mesa greeted her softly. "Morning, Auntie." The woman didn't look up. "You didn't sleep well." Mesa blinked. "How did you—" "Your footsteps kept moving upstairs. The house hears when someone wanders at night." Mesa laughed uneasily. "I guess I was restless. Maybe the mountain air." Aunt Orange started sweeping. "The air here doesn't make you restless, child. It makes you remember." Mesa felt the first tremor of discomfort, a prickle at the back of her neck. She spent the morning walking through Huai, Phakhong with her camera slung at her side. The villagers kept their distance. Women carrying baskets of herbs avoided her gaze. An old man sharpening a machete simply watched, the rhythmic scrape of metal on stone following her as she passed. The dirt paths between the houses led down toward a stream where fog hung low over the water. Wooden prayer charms, small carved faces, cracked and faded, hung from the branches of trees along the bank. Mesa filmed them carefully, whispering into her microphone. Local talismans, likely used for protection, possibly related to the moon-bound rite. When she played the clip back to check the audio, she noticed something faint beneath her voice, an echoing whisper. She turned the volume up. But lights, shadow. She froze, rewound, played it again. The words were there. 2 syllables, drawn out, sung rather than spoken. By noon, the fog began to lift. Mesa found her way to the open clearing she'd glimpsed from the truck on her arrival. It was larger than she expected, about the size of a football field, ringed by the same 6 weather-worn stakes she'd seen in her research. The soil was dark, scorched, and in the center lay a circular patch where nothing grew, not grass, not weeds. She set her tripod and began filming. The villagers avoid this place. I believe this was once the site of a binding ceremony, possibly linked to moon cycles. There are burn marks consistent with repeated ritual fires. Her voice steadied the way it always did when she was behind the lens. The camera made her brave. But when she lowered it for a moment, she thought she saw movement at the far edge of the clearing, a figure slipping between the trees, dressed in white. She raised the camera again. The figure was gone. That evening back at the house, Aunt Orne poured tea from a dented kettle. You went to the clearing. It wasn't a question. Mesa hesitated. I had to. It's important to the story. The older woman sighed. The last one who said that left only his camera behind. Someone else came here before me? Mesa asked. Aunt Orne nodded slowly. 15 years ago, a man from the city. He asked questions about the rite, stayed 3 nights. On the 4th night, we heard the drums. Mesa leaned forward. What happened to him? The woman stared into her cup. He never left. But sometimes, when the mist is thick, people say they hear him asking the same questions again. Later that night, Mesa reviewed her footage on her laptop. When she reached the clip of the clearing, the picture trembled for a second. Static, distortion, though her camera rarely malfunctioned. In the distorted frame, she thought she saw something impossible. A shape, lying in the center of the circle, faintly luminous under daylight, like a body outlined in ash. She paused, zoomed in. The outline was female. Her stomach tightened. The wind outside picked up, whistling through gaps in the wooden wall. Then came the sound. A dull, distant beat. So faint it could have been imagination. Mesa turned the volume down on her laptop, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from outside. She crossed to the window. The mist had returned, thicker than ever, glowing faintly with moonlight. A movement caught her eye near the tree line beyond the house. Something white, shifting between the trunks. She strained to see, pressing her face against the glass. For a moment, she saw what looked like a group of people walking slowly, carrying candles. The lights wavered like will-o-wisps. She grabbed her camera and hit record. The lens caught only darkness. Then softly, from beyond the trees, bind to the light, tie to the shadow. The voice was a woman's, calm and melodic, repeated in a low chant by others. The drum beat followed, matching her heartbeat. Mesa whispered to herself, "It's happening." The next morning, the village seemed unchanged, except that no one spoke to her. Men who had once nodded now turned away. Children who had waved now hid behind doorways. Even the dogs wouldn't come near her. At the market table, she asked a woman selling fruit, "Did you hear drums last night?" The woman's hand stilled. "We hear nothing, Kun. You should leave." "Why?" "Because the mountain has started to remember you." That afternoon, Aunt Orn found Mesa packing her camera gear. "You mean to film it, don't you?" Mesa hesitated. "If it's real, Auntie, the world deserves to know." "Real?" The older woman laughed softly. "It's more real than you, child. The moon-bound right doesn't need belief. It only needs witnesses." Mesa frowned. "What does that mean?" But Aunt Orn was already walking away, murmuring a prayer under her breath. That night, Mesa couldn't sleep. The fog was gone. The moon blazed bright and white over the hills. She sat by the window, camera ready, waiting for the sound. An hour passed, then another. Nothing. Finally, she switched the camera off. That's when she noticed the reflection. In the glass, behind her shoulder, stood a figure. Tall, draped in white cloth, face obscured. She spun around. The room was empty. She stared back at the window. The reflection was still there. It raised one pale hand and touched the glass from the other side. Mesa stumbled backward, heart pounding. The window pane shuddered with the sound of distant drums returning, now faster, echoing through the valley like thunder under the earth. From somewhere deep in the night came voices. "Bind to the light. Tie to the shadow. Rise." A cold draft blew through the house, snuffing the candle on her desk. The last thing Mesa saw before darkness swallowed the room was her camera's recording light blinking on its own. When dawn came, it felt like an illusion. The light that entered Mesa's room was pale and cold, unable to warm the air. Dust drifted through the thin beam that crossed her floor. She hadn't slept. Her camera still sat on the table, the red light dead now, its battery drained. She replayed the footage from last night, her hands trembling. The image was murky, half fog, half static, but something pulsed faintly in the center of the frame, like a heartbeat of light. She slowed it down. For a fraction of a second, she saw a face, white, eyeless, featureless, leaning toward the lens. Mesa slammed the laptop shut, her pulse hammering. Downstairs, Aunt Orn was already awake, stirring something in a pot over the fire. The old woman didn't turn as Mesa entered. "You filmed them," she said quietly. Mesa froze. "How did you—" "The house told me. It always does." Mesa sat down opposite her. "What are they, Auntie? Those people in white?" Aunt Orn's stirring slowed. "Not people." She ladled soup into a bowl and set it in front of Mesa, though neither of them touched it. "Every 15 years, on the night when the moon is fullest, the dead wake. Not all, only the ones whose names were never spoken after burial. The forgotten." Mesa frowned. "Ghosts?" "No," Aunt Orn said. "Echoes. They're drawn to what remembers them, the land, the trees, the air. The moon-bound rite was made to keep them from walking among us." Mesa leaned forward. "So the ritual's real?" Aunt Orn looked up sharply. "Real doesn't mean safe." "But why do it here? Why this village?" The woman's gaze went distant. Huai Phakhong was built on an older place, a monastery burned down long before my grandmother was born. They said the abbot tried to bind the restless spirits of plague victims to the moonlight, but the ritual failed. The fire consumed the temple, but the ashes never cooled. Mesa's breath caught. The circle in the clearing, Orn nodded. The circle of ash. We bury new sins there, but it never fails. Mesa took her camera and left the house before the woman could stop her. The morning mist had thinned, revealing the forest in full color, rich greens darkened by dew, the occasional flash of orange where dead leaves clung to branches. She followed the dirt path down toward the clearing, her boots sinking into mud. As she approached, birds fell silent. The clearing was exactly as before. 6 wooden posts, the dark ring of scorched earth. But now she noticed something she hadn't before. Fine white threads running between the posts, almost invisible in daylight, glistening faintly when they caught the sun. She crouched and traced one with her finger. It wasn't thread. It was hair. Long, coarse, and gray. Her stomach twisted. She lifted her camera and began filming again. The lens zoomed across the clearing. In the center lay small, unremarkable stones scattered in a pattern. But when she stepped back, she realized the stones formed a spiral, turning inward. And at its heart, half buried in the dirt, was a fragment of bone. Human bone. Mesa knelt, brushing the soil away. The fragment was smooth, yellowed, shaped like part of a jaw. Her pulse quickened with a thrill of discovery and dread. She adjusted the focus, whispering into her microphone. Evidence suggests the moon-bound rite involves human remains, possibly used symbolically to bind the spirit. Local sources. A sound cut her off. Snap. A branch broke behind her. She turned. At the edge of the forest stood a child, barefoot, maybe 7 years old, wearing a faded red shirt. His skin was pale, his eyes far too dark for his face. Mesa lowered the camera. "Hey there, what's your name?" The child didn't answer. He raised one hand and pointed toward the center of the circle. Mesa followed his gesture. The bone fragment she'd uncovered was gone. When she looked back up, the child had vanished. Her heart pounded as she backed away from the clearing. She nearly tripped over a small wooden idol half buried in mud, a crude carving of a face, its mouth stitched shut with black thread. She picked it up carefully. At its base, faint letters had been burned into the wood. Yadu. Don't look. Mesa's breath quickened. She stuffed the idol into her bag and hurried back toward the village. By late afternoon, the fog returned like a slow tide. When Mesa reached Aunt Orn's house, the old woman was waiting on the porch, arms folded. "I told you to stay away." She pulled the idol out of her bag. "Auntie, what does this mean?" The woman's face went pale. She backed away as if Mesa was holding a snake. "Where did you find that?" "In the clearing." "Then throw it back." Mesa hesitated. "It's just wood." "Not anymore," Aunt Orn's voice trembled. "That was one of the bindings. Each face carved for a forgotten soul. You touched it. Now it knows you." Mesa swallowed hard. "Knows me?" "When the next moon rises, it will come for what it lost." That night, rain began to fall. It started as a light drizzle, then grew into a heavy, unending downpour that drowned all other sound. Mesa sat by the window, staring out into the storm. Her camera sat beside her, still recording, its lens pointed at the dark. Lightning flashed. For a brief second, she saw movement by the trees, a shape standing perfectly still in the rain. Another flash. It was closer now, just beyond the fence. A figure in white, head bowed, hands hanging limp. She blinked, and it was gone. She turned back to her camera. The red light blinked steadily. She pressed playback. The recording showed the same view: rain, lightning, darkness. Then a single frame of something else. The figure standing right at the window, its face pressed against the glass, mouth sewn shut with black thread. Mesa screamed, woke Aunt Orne, who rushed into the room clutching a candle. What happened? Mesa pointed at the window, breath shaking. Someone was there. The old woman crossed to the window, but there was nothing, only rain streaming down the glass. Aunt Orne turned, eyes grave. The bindings are breaking. What bindings? Mesa whispered. The ones that keep the dead tied to the moonlight. You touched one, child. You made it remember your name. Mesa's voice cracked. Then what do I do? The candle flickered, almost going out. Aunt Orne's face was half in shadow. Pray it forgets before the full moon, or you'll take its place in the circle. Mesa didn't sleep. Every hour she checked her camera, replayed the footage, convinced she could rationalize what she'd seen. Some trick of light, a reflection, her mind exhausted from fear. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't. Something had followed her back from the clearing. She could feel it in the air of the house, the heaviness of every breath, the faint smell of ash that hadn't been there before. At 3 a.m, she opened her notebook and began to write, her handwriting unsteady. There's truth in the ritual. It's not folklore. The villagers are hiding something, but I think they're afraid, not guilty. The circle is older than them, older than all of this. She paused, listening. From somewhere above, on the roof, came a slow, dragging sound, something heavy moving across the tiles. Scrape, scrape, scrape. She froze. The sound stopped. Then directly above her ceiling, thump. A single, deliberate knock. Mesa stared upward, every nerve on fire. Please, please stop. The knock came again. Thump. She backed away, trembling until her heels struck her camera tripod. It toppled, clattering to the floor. Instantly, the sound above stopped. Silence. Then a whisper from somewhere very close, so faint she couldn't tell if it came from inside her head or outside the wall. Don't look. At dawn, the sky cleared as if nothing had happened. The rain had washed the world clean, leaving everything bright and glistening. But the circle of ash was darker than ever, spreading slowly into the forest soil like an ink stain. From the hills, the first birds began to sing, and from somewhere far below the ground came a sound that was not thunder, a slow, rhythmic beat echoing up through the earth. Thump, thump, thump. The mountain was awake again. The rain had passed, but the valley refused to dry. Mist pooled in every hollow, steaming off the rooftops like breath. The forest gleamed with dew and silence. Mesa felt the exhaustion of sleepless nights pulling at her skin, yet something colder moved beneath her fatigue, an obsession. She could not leave now. The answers were too close. She opened her camera case and checked the recordings again. The last clip from the night before was corrupted. A flicker of white, a mouth sewn shut, then static. She rewound. At one precise frame, the static-formed words burned into the noise itself. Look at the moon. Messa slammed the lid shut. Downstairs, Aunt Orrin was spreading herbs on a cloth to dry. The scent was sharp. Lemongrass, lime leaves, and something metallic that Messa couldn't name. "Do you know of an abbot who lived here long ago?" Messa asked. The older woman stiffened. "Why do you ask?" "I found his name in one of your books." Messa held up a dusty volume she had discovered that morning on a shelf. Calm Luang's teachings on the balance of shadow and light. Aunt Orrin crossed herself and whispered a prayer. He should not be spoken of. Messa pressed. He tried to create the moon-bound rite, didn't he? The woman's silence was answer enough. According to the book, the abbot, Luang Phakhong, had served at a monastery that once stood where the clearing now lay. He had been obsessed with the duality of light and shadow, teaching that all living souls were reflections in the mirror of the moon. But when an epidemic swept through the valley, he attempted to perform a ritual to bind the souls of the dying to the moonlight itself, to keep them safe from the hunger of the dark. The ritual failed. The monastery burned to the ground, and every monk who assisted him was found dead, faces covered with mirrors, throats slit in a perfect crescent shape. Messa read the lines twice. Then she noticed an annotation written in another hand. The blood must touch the mirror before the light can bind. She looked up slowly. "Auntie, what does that mean?" The older woman's eyes glistened. "It means he made a door he could never close." That afternoon, Messa walked back to the clearing again. The circle of ash looked different now, wider, darker, as if it had grown overnight. At its center lay something new, a mirror. It was round, about the size of a dinner plate, half buried in soot. Its surface was blackened, but when Messa brushed it with her sleeve, the glass gleamed, perfectly clean beneath. Her own reflection stared back, pale and tired. Then behind her reflection, another figure appeared. She spun around. No one. When she looked back, her reflection was smiling. She dropped the mirror and stumbled backward. The ground beneath her shifted, sinking slightly, releasing a smell like rot and metal. Something white jutted from the soil, another bone, this one shaped like a finger. She fell to her knees, trying to steady her breath. "It's not real," she whispered. "It's just the mind playing tricks." The mirror lay half buried beside her, catching a sliver of sunlight. The reflected beam flashed across her wrist, and for an instant, she thought she saw a pattern under her skin, a faint mark like a rope burn wrapping around her arm. She covered it quickly and fled the clearing. When Messa returned to the house, Aunt Orrin was waiting with a bundle of cloth. She unwrapped it to reveal 6 small mirrors, each tied with white string. "Take one," she said. "Why?" "Hang it above your bed. It will confuse the thing that's following you. It cannot tell which reflection is real." Messa took one reluctantly. The glass was clouded, but when she turned it toward the light, she saw faint stains on its edge, dark, dried, like old blood. That night, thunder rolled far off in the mountains. Messa hung the mirror above her bed as instructed. Sleep came in fits. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw faces,
blank and white, floating in black water. Then came the voice, soft and steady, as if someone whispered beside her ear. The moon remembers. Her eyes flew open. The room was dark. The mirror above her bed reflected nothing. She switched on her flashlight and filmed the mirror. Through the lens, something moved inside it, a shape, shifting behind the glass, as though a second room existed within. A woman's outline appeared in the reflection, head bowed, long hair dripping with water. Then the mouth lifted, slowly, into a grin that tore too wide. Messa screamed and dropped the camera. When she looked back, the mirror was clean. At sunrise, she ran to the edge of the village. The locals avoided her completely now. Even Uncle Sang, who had returned to deliver supplies, looked away when she called his name. Uncle, please, I need to get out of here. He spat on the ground. Too late. I told you not to look. What do you mean? He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and muttered through the open window. When the right sees you, it keeps you. The road out won't take you anywhere now. He drove off without another word. That evening, Aunt Orne lit candles and began placing bowls of rice at each corner of the room. What are you doing? Making offerings. The hungry ones are stirring. Messa swallowed. Auntie, if the abbot created the right, can't we undo it? The old woman shook her head. He died before he could write the words to end it. The last page of his book is missing. Messa glanced toward her bag. No, it's not. She retrieved the book she had taken from the shelf earlier. The last pages were glued together with some resinous substance, brittle with age. Carefully, she peeled them apart. Faded ink, almost gone, but the writing was still legible. To seal the mirror, the one who sees must feed it blood before the moon is full. Only when the mirror drinks can it sleep. She looked up trembling. What if it's true? Aunt Orne whispered. Then you have 2 nights left. Messa sat alone for hours after Aunt Orne went to sleep. The candles burned low. The mirror above her bed caught their light, throwing slivers across the room. She lifted it down and placed it on the table, staring into it. Her reflection looked back, expression hollow. She touched the glass. It was warm. The voice came again, faint but clear. Feed it. Her nose began to bleed once more, a thin line running down to her lips. She stared, transfixed, as a single drop fell onto the mirror's surface. The glass rippled like water, and then nothing. The bleeding stopped. The air lightened, as though the weight pressing on her chest had lifted. She almost laughed in relief. But as she turned to reach for a tissue, she noticed the reflection hadn't moved. It still stared straight ahead, smiling faintly. Then, without her moving, it raised a hand and touched its cheek, tracing a line of red down to its mouth. The mirror cracked. Aunt Orne burst into the room at the sound, clutching her prayer beads. The mirror lay shattered across the floor, glinting in the candlelight. Messa sat motionless, eyes wide, whispering something over and over. Aunt Orne knelt beside her. What did you do? Messa looked at her, voice barely audible. It drank, but it's still hungry. That night, the village dogs howled until dawn, and in the clearing beyond the trees, the mirror Messa had found half buried in ash reflected the moon again, its cracks glimmering like veins of fire. Inside the reflection, something moved, something that had Messa's eyes. Morning broke thin and sickly. sunlight diffused through gauze-colored mist. The forest around Huai Phakhong dripped as though it still bled last night's rain. Messa's eyes burned from a sleepless dawn. Every shadow looked alive. The cracked mirror lay on the table, dull and harmless in daylight, but she knew better now. She packed her camera, flashlight, and the old monk's book into her bag. The last page's words haunted her. Feed it blood before the moon is full. If that was the cure, she'd already failed. The full moon would rise again tomorrow night. Downstairs, Aunt Orrin sat beside the hearth, lips moving soundlessly. When Messa stepped off the last stair, the woman's gaze lifted, sharp and wet with fear. "You're going to the clearing again." Messa didn't deny it. There's something buried there. A building, the abbot's monastery. "Leave it buried," Aunt Orrin hissed. "He chained what should never wake." Messa slung her camera over her shoulder. "If he chained it, maybe I can learn how." The old woman's voice cracked. "He failed because he looked too long into the shadow. The shadow looked back." Messa hesitated only a heartbeat before walking out into the fog. The descent. The path to the clearing wound between trees blackened by age and moss. Birds had vanished again. Even insects were silent. The smell changed as she walked. First damp soil, then something older, like burnt incense mixed with iron. At the edge of the circle of ash, she paused. The ground shimmered faintly in daylight, a dusting of soot laced with pale bones too small to belong to animals. Messa took out the camera, pressed record, and began speaking quietly, half to herself. Entry 27. There's evidence the clearing sits atop the old monastery site. I'm going to check for substructure, foundations, catacombs, anything that survived the fire. She moved to the northern stake where the soil dipped slightly. Kneeling, she brushed aside loose ash until her fingers met stone, a slab carved with characters eaten by flame. She traced them, recognizing fragments of ancient Lana script. Shadow below, light above. One must feed the other. The slab trembled under her touch. Then, with a groan like breath from underground, a crack opened between two stones wide enough to slip through. Cool air breathed out, stale, dry, ancient. Messa aimed the flashlight inside, a chamber no larger than a classroom, circular and domed. The walls were lined with mirrors, dozens of them, some shattered, some perfectly intact. Their surfaces caught the light and multiplied it endlessly until Messa's single flashlight became 100 cold suns. In the center of the floor stood an altar, carved from charred teak. Upon it rested a clay bowl filled with something black and hardened. Messa stepped closer. Inside the bowl lay blood, dried to a tar-dark crust. Embedded within were teeth, human, small, delicate. Her breath hitched. She raised the camera, zooming in on the bowl, narrating softly. This must be the abbot's binding vessel. The mirrors likely reflected moonlight onto it during the ritual. Her voice echoed oddly, repeating a half-second later, but the echo wasn't her own. Binding vessel, whispered a dozen throats at once. Messa spun, the flashlight jerking across the walls. Every mirror now reflected not her, but a monk in charred robes, eyes hollowed out, mouths moving soundlessly. She stumbled back until her shoulders struck the altar. The mirrors shivered, ringing like thin bells. In their surfaces, the monks turned their heads toward her, all at once. One mirror cracked. A thin line of blood trickled down its face. Messa raised the camera instinctively, filming through shaking hands. The lens captured movement the naked eye couldn't, shapes forming behind her, tendrils of shadow stretching toward the center of the room. "Who are you?" she whispered. The whisper came back layered, multiplied, and among it one clear male voice emerged, calm, deliberate, ancient. "I am the abbot who fed the moon." The light flickered. At the far end of the chamber, a figure detached itself from the darkness. A man in robes scorched black, his skull visible where the fire had eaten away flesh. In his hands he held a mirror rimmed in iron. "You looked," the abbot said, voice like crumbling ash. "So the right knows you." Mesa tried to step back, but her feet rooted to the floor. "Why?" she managed. "Why did you make this?" "To hold what should not fall into the world." His head tilted. "But the mirror thirsts forever. When I died, it drank me." The mirrors around them rippled like water. In each reflection, Mesa saw herself, not now, but dead, eyes sewn shut. "How do I stop it?" she begged. The abbot raised the iron-rimmed mirror. Cracks spidered across its surface. "Break the moon before it breaks you." The chamber roared as if the earth itself exhaled. Dust fell from the ceiling, mirrors shattered one after another, each detonation a scream. Mesa lunged toward the staircase, clutching her camera. Shards sliced her arms as she ran, but she didn't feel them. She burst out of the crack into daylight, gasping, coated in soot. Behind her, the ground rumbled and the gap sealed, swallowing the darkness again. For a long time, she lay in the dirt, shaking, until the sound of the forest returned. Wind, insects, a distant river. Then she looked at her camera's display. The battery icon flashed red, but the last clip played perfectly clear. The abbot's face filled the screen, unburned, eyes human. He spoke directly into the lens. "When the moon is full, she will see her face in mine." The image froze, then turned to static. Mesa dropped the camera. Her reflection stared back from its blink screen, except now the burn mark on the abbot's cheek was on hers. Return to the house. By the time Mesa stumbled back to Aunt Orrin's home, the sun had set behind the ridges. The air felt electric, charged with waiting. Aunt Orrin met her at the door, saw the blood on her arms, and pulled her inside. "What did you do?" Mesa's voice was hoarse. "He's still there. The abbot. He says the moon will show me his face." The old woman's hands shook as she pressed a wet cloth to Mesa's wounds. "Then he's chosen you to finish what he began." "I don't want this." "No one does. That's why the right takes those who look. The mirror remembers the eyes that meet it." Mesa grabbed her by the shoulders. "Tell me how to stop it." Aunt Orrin's eyes brimmed. "Break the moon," he said. He meant the mirror that faces it, the one buried under the ash. "Smash it before the moon rises tomorrow, or it will smash you." That night, the valley did not sleep. The wind carried whispers that weren't wind. The air trembled with an unseen pulse, the echo of drums buried under miles of soil. Mesa sat by the window, camera rolling on her lap, filming the clouds drifting across the sky. Through them, the moon swelled, almost full, its edge a thin crescent, a shadow. Her reflection in the glass blinked out of sync with her. The valley held its breath. Every leaf, every creature, every whisper of wind seemed to wait for nightfall. The mist had burned away, leaving the air raw and sharp, heavy with the scent of smoke that had not yet risen. Mesa stood on the porch of Aunt Orrin's house, staring at the ridge where the moon would soon appear. Her arms were wrapped in gauze. Her eyes looked older than her years. The abbot's words replayed in her mind like a curse she couldn't unhear. "Break the moon before it breaks you." Inside, Aunt Orrin moved with quiet urgency, tying bundles of herbs and salt, lighting sticks of incense that filled the room with acrid sweetness.
Take these, she said, pressing a bundle into Mesa's hands. Burn them when you reach the circle. It may buy you time. Mesa nodded numbly. If I don't come back, then the valley sleeps for another 15 years. Aunt Orn's voice cracked. But I'll light a candle for you every night until it does. The last rim of sunlight vanished. The world turned silver and cold. Somewhere deep within the forest, the first drum began to beat. Thump, thump, thump. Into the ash. Mesa moved through the trees as though the sound guided her steps. Every beat seemed to pulse through the ground, up her legs, into her heart. When she reached the clearing, the circle of ash was alive, glowing faintly as though embers hid beneath its surface. The 6 wooden posts now stood straight and tall, their ropes humming like harp strings in the wind. Between them hung mirrors, new, polished, flawless, each one reflecting the swollen moon that had climbed above the ridge. In the center, half buried in ash, lay the great mirror she had found before. Its cracks had healed. It shone with impossible light, brighter than the moon itself. Mesa stepped forward, her boots sinking into the warm soil. She set the camera down, still recording, its lens aimed at the circle. Entry 28. Final attempt. Destroying the central mirror before full reflection. She lifted a rock, heavy and jagged, raised it high, and stopped. From the mirror's surface, her reflection moved first. The other Mesa. The reflection smiled. It was her, yet not her. The same eyes, but black as oil. It tilted its head, mirroring nothing. You fed it, it said, though its lips did not move. Now let it feed you. Mesa stumbled back, dropping the rock. The voice came again, louder, rising from every mirror around the circle until the air vibrated. Bind to the light, tied to the shadow. The drums quickened, echoing from beneath the earth. She clamped her hands over her ears. Stop! The mirrors shuddered. Cracks bloomed across their surfaces like spiderwebs. From each fracture seeped a black mist that curled upward, forming shapes, faces, limbs, open mouths stitched shut with red thread. Mesa fell to her knees, choking on ash. Her reflection crouched within the mirror, its smile stretching wider. Break the moon, it whispered, and you break yourself. The abbot returns. A figure emerged from the mist. Robes charred, skin half gone, the abbot. He moved as though the world bent to his steps. His shadow stretched across the ground until it touched Mesa's own. You have seen too much, he said. Now you must choose. Bind it or be it. Why me? Mesa gasped. Why any of us? Because the moon is a mirror. It needs a face. He lifted his hand, and the great mirror rose from the ground, hovering between them. Its light flooded the clearing, turning night into pale day. Inside the glass, Mesa saw countless versions of herself, each trapped in silent agony, each bound by white ropes that reached into the dark. The abbot pressed his burnt palm to the surface. Blood welled from his hand and spread across the mirror in crimson veins. The rite did not end, only pass on. Mesa felt the mark on her arm burn like fire. The ropes of reflection tightened around her chest. Breaking the moon. With the last of her strength, Mesa grabbed the rock again and hurled it at the hovering mirror. The stone struck dead center. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the world screamed. Light exploded outward, blinding, searing the trees to silhouettes. Every mirror shattered at once, shards spitting through the air like knives. The sound was a chorus of breaking glass and howling wind. The abbot staggered backward, his form unraveling into smoke. You cannot destroy the light, he cried, his voice dissolving. You only scatter it.
Mesa dropped to the ground, covering her head as the shards rained down. When the noise stopped, she dared to look up. The clearing was gone. In its place yawned a crater filled with still water, reflecting the broken moon above, a single missing piece torn from its edge. Her camera lay beside her, cracked but still glowing red, recording. In the water's reflection, she saw herself standing, but her reflection did not move. It smiled one last time, then sank beneath the surface. In the morning after, when Aunt Orne reached the clearing, dawn had already burned away the mist. She found Mesa's camera lying at the crater's edge, still warm. Inside the water, only the moon's reflection remained, calm and whole again. The villagers said the drum stopped that night for the first time in living memory. The air felt lighter. Aunt Orne took the camera home, cleaned the ash from its buttons, and played the final recording. Misa's face filled the frame. She was smiling, peaceful, eyes reflecting the pale shimmer of the moon. Entry 29. Sometimes to break the moon, you have to become its shadow. The screen went black. Epilogue. 15 years later, a travel blogger named Rin uploaded a video titled Lost Northern Monastery Found Beneath Village Lake. In the footage, she stood by a mirror-still pond, describing local legends about a vanished filmmaker who had disappeared there. Behind her, the water shimmered. For a heartbeat, another reflection appeared beside hers. A woman with ash on her face, holding a camera, smiling faintly at the lens. Then the surface rippled, and both reflections were gone.